There we are.
Full version, subversion. Right, thank you everyone for coming. I'm pleased to be able to introduce one of our few Erskine Fellows for the year, Dr. Rino.
Lovreglio.
Thank you very much. He is a senior lecturer at Massey University in the School of
Built Environment.
Yes. But I'll pass you over to him. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And today I'm gonna give you a bit of overview on what's my work in terms of research, the core of my research, but I do much more. Today we are gonna just talk about one specific disaster fire, but I've been involved in many other research on earthquakes, evacuation, tsunami evacuation. We are starting, then flood, then wildfire. I think I missed just a few disasters, but I'm trying to have all my portfolio to be a real disaster man. And today we are going to talk about some of the study that I've been doing. I've been trying to have a lecture for 6 hours, but they didn't allow me to show you everything. So today we are going to be just focusing on some specific aspect and show you a bit of modeling solution applied to virtual reality data we managed to develop in the last year. Who am I? I'm a civil engineer. I used to study, broad civil engineering, a bit of everything from structural, geotechnic, hydraulic, and then I decided to do a master in civil engineering, focusing on structures, because they were telling me that it was the most complicated from a mathematical point of view. It was the most challenging. I decided to do it just for the sake of proving myself that I was capable to do it. And towards the end of my career as a master, I realized that's not what I want to do in my life. It was, I like the math. I tried to find a job as a civil engineer, but I found out when I was at this stage, it was after 2008, reception, that the only way that people wanted to pay me in companies, it was with experience, no cash. So that's why I decided to try the path of a PhD. I didn't want to do it. I did the test just for the sake to make my supervisor happy, and he was right. I got the scholarship, and that's how my journey started. Towards the end of my master, I realized already that pure civil engineer wasn't my path. So I started doing something different, using evacuation modeling and a bit of non-immersive virtual reality to understand how people behave in fire evacuation. And our really important study, evacuation modeling is a really important component of fire safety engineering, because whenever we design new building, we need to estimate how long it takes for people to evacuate, but we simulate also the fire. So we need to build the equation to make sure that we allow people to have enough time to get out of a building before the fire is gonna take over. So that's the really tiny part of my research. I was fascinated by applied statistics since I was a bachelor student, and I managed to do much more advanced things during my master, and then I keep going on that. I'm still working on that and expanding towards different directions using machine learning now, and who knows where I'm gonna go in the future. And so my PhD student was from the three technical universities of Italy, Bari, Milano, and Torino. They used to have a joint PhD school, and I managed to apply and get into this school. And the people that inspired me at the really beginning were my old supervisor, Professor Bori, that now is retired, Enrico, that used to be one of our PhD students, Polytechnic of Bari, and now is associate professor in Lund University, and Professor Delorio, that now is dean in University of Canterbury in Spain. He was the one that introduced me a bit on random utility theories and stuff like that, and I was a lot fascinated by that. Been traveling a lot, was in Edinburgh for 2 years, where I was working with Achille Fonzone, another transportation engineer that was applying quite a lot of econometrics, and that's why I was working with him. Then I moved to Sweden, and I met this young guy. Now he's getting a bit older, probably you will recognize it, Daniel Nilsson. He's prof here in civil engineering. He's more than prof now, he's head. And I've been traveling, keep working outside Italy for most of my PhD, because I was working quite a lot with these three guys. And then eventually moved to New Zealand to do some research about earthquakes and training. Or we could use virtual reality BIM to train people and explain them what's the best things to do during and after earthquakes. And after my postdoc, during my postdoc, I managed to be at MIT for advanced deeping in applied statistics, especially on Bayesian analysis applied to discrete choice model. I'm going to show you some of the results we published with one of the PhD students of Moshe Ben Akiva. Then I did another postdoc NIST as a guest researcher. I went there another time when I was already senior lecturer. And then I decided to put my roots at Massey University. And I've been there since 2018. This is the guy that tried to keep me stay there. I'm really always fermenting to go and do things with many people. Is the one that tried to calm me down. And the main technology that I've been using so far has been in terms of hardware, virtual reality, augmented reality, BIM. And try to apply this mainly for fire disaster and other disaster, but I need to do a bit of a construction research because I'm a part of the School of Built Environment to justify my salary in front of my boss. So this is me in the nighttime. I try to spend my night awake when the sky allowed it to take those pictures. And so that's why when you find me around, if you visit Auckland, I'm grumpy that day, that means that I was spending my night doing astrophotography. So nothing personal. I have established the Digital Built Environment Lab. It used to be my office, and people were laughing at me because I was calling my lab my office. And then yes, we have been expanding in terms of space, but also people, in terms of all the toys that we have. These are the two new lecturers that join us. We are gonna have another assistant lecturer in digital technology fairly soon. We have an opening position. And if you're Kiwi, you should recognize Chris Chitty. It was the guy that was doing experiments during the cartoons back in the days. If you remember that there was a geeky guy doing experiment during the time that you were supposed to watch cartoon, he was the naughty one. He was doing experiment, and now he's helping us to build any kind of hardware we need for our research. I'm working as associate editor for Safety Science, so I'm the bad guy in Safety Science, and just reviewer and part of the editorial member of the other two journals. Awards, I got the awards as a research, the research medal at Massey University for early career last year. They give it a couple of them every year to the best research, and apply of course for the early career because I'm still a baby. And I got the Erskine Fellowship this year. I was told that it was given to old grumpy professor close to retirement. I'm grumpy, old, so that means that I'm gonna probably get close to retirement fairly soon. So, what we can do with virtual reality, I'm Italian, you know that I have a strong relationship with my mom, and that was the main motivation why we use virtual reality. But let's start talking about serious stuff. So in theory, I should talk about three different aspects about how we apply virtual reality in our field. Because we do a lot of testing of new emergency systems, but I'm not talking about that. I put some slide as a backup slide just to give you an idea. If we have time, we will do it. Don't know how much time I got today, but we will see. Training people, but today I'm going to investigate on the hardcore, investigate human behavior, because all the other two things are too easy from a mathematical point of view. And Daniel told me to give you a hard time, so that's why. So I started with the behavioral studies and how people behave in emergencies, starting with really ugly non-immersive experience, because I didn't have capability yet to develop immersive and really advanced realistic experiment. And this was one of my ugliest experiments that I did. I was creating video in which I was showing different number of people going towards different exit, and I designed this experiment with orthogonal design, and I was trying to understand with people, by asking people their choice, I was trying to infer and try to understand how different factors were affecting their choice. In this case, we could gather information with 12 scenarios from 250 people, spreading this video online and gathering information, aware of the low ecological validity of this experiment, but as a master student, it was the only things that I could do. VR was way too expensive and not accessible at that time. I wish I had the technology that is now here. But then during my PhD, I managed to try to create something that it was slightly more realistic because I discovered Unity, that is a game engine that used to be used only to develop video games, but now we are using it for many research aspects. And this is one of the first, this is one of the simulation and video that I created in Unity. So I developed also in this case different scenario, and we are gonna go deeper in this case how to develop those scenario, because I stopped using orthogonal design and started to use something that was more advanced. And once again, I was showing this video to people, non-immersive, and asked them what would be their choice in this kind of situation. And it was done still online, so I managed to develop all the software that it was supposed to go on the server, and managed to interact with the person in terms of showing video and collecting information about their choice. For me, it was something exciting, this kind of experiment, but now I still feel that it was ugly and not immersive enough, and the ecological validity was like really ugly. And that's what happened to when I moved to Massey. Finally, virtual reality started becoming cheaper and cheaper, and I had the possibility to establish my lab and start buying my toys. And this is one of the examples of VR experiment, the biggest VR experiment I've done about exit choice, because I'm paranoid with exit choice. And we managed to create a space that it was 6 meters by 7 meters, in which people were capable to walk in the physical space, but in reality, in virtual reality, they were walking in a different space. In a space in which we will have asked them, instead of asking, we will observe which exit they were choosing. And I'm gonna show you the experiment. This was developed with a Vive Pro. We had 4 tracking stations, and it's really difficult to bring it here. And now we are working with Pijin. She did the hard work. Pijin now is working me to put this experiment on the Oculus Quest. So next time I'm gonna visit, I'm gonna just bring a box with the VR headset that is capable to run the experiment in a really automatic way. And this is how the experiment looked like. So we had people outside the room, and we were asking them to reach the red dot, the red spot there, and wait for instruction for the start of the experiment without telling them what it would happen before. And here is me moving in the physical space, and I was perceiving that I was moving in the virtual space in the same way. So also in this case, we developed a different scenario with the goal to investigate multiple factors at the same time. Number of people close to the exit, the presence of smoke getting out of the door, the distance of the door because we were slightly moving the distance, and the fact that the user was familiar with just one of the 3 exits. So let's go to the dark side of my research, because now I've shown you just the fun part. There is much more that is happening, and it's better if I do it like this, otherwise it will never stop. We don't want to have the Imperial March going on. So when we want to model human behavior, we can use random utility theory and random utility models. That's one of the easiest way to do it. And when we use that, we use function that looks like that, utility function that look like that. They have a deterministic part that is basically can be a linear function, but even not linear structure from a structural point of view function, plus an error terms. And what we do is try to estimate the probability. Instead of having certainty that someone is gonna do something, we start calculating the probability that a utility function is greater than all the other utility functions. We can calculate the uncertainty because we have an error terms that is giving us uncertainty. In general, we assume that in these error terms, we put all the things that we are not capable to model or measure. And then depending on the error structure that we can have a different formulation. We have the probit or logit formulation depending on the assumption that we made on the error terms. And we had that one guy managed to win the Nobel Prize just to figuring out that with a specific error terms, we could determine a way to have a close formulation for this equation that looks like this one. It's called multinomial logit. It has been used in so many things from marketing to transportation, predicting many things, because it has a really close formulation, and back in the day it was really difficult to compute something that likelihood function to estimate model when the formulation was not close. Now we have so much computational power that we don't really need to stay stuck on this, but if you want to do a simple exercise and you just use your Excel to calculate probability and you use multinomial logic, you can still do it. And from the sake of education, it's really useful, especially when you explain this to students. If you're not familiar with the concept of that equation, we are going to do the weirdo experiment. That is the easiest way to understand it. And I need a volunteer. Maybe? I volunteer you. So, the weirdo experiment, that I realized that when I do it with my student, the idea click in their mind. And they understand it and they start thinking, so I can use there, there, and there. So, our independent variable is going to be my distance from Mayday, and then the things that I'm going to calculate is the probability that something bad is going to happen to me. Because I'm going to start talking to him, and I'm going to start getting closer, and I'm going to stop it because he starts smiling. I'm not insured by ACC, I don't want that he starts punching me or kicking me. And this is something that we do in reality. Whenever we try to talk to someone, we get closer, but not too close, because we know that the probability that something wrong is going to happen increase. So unconsciously, we kind of behave like this kind of modeling because we don't really know how much far we need to stay. And sometimes people take more risk, it depends on how much you're risk adverse, how much you actually are sensitive to the variable of the distance. And so that's the basic way to explaining what's the easiest binary logit. It's basically something that is a function of a single thing. But probably this can become something, assume that, I'm not doing it there. Assume that this is the continuation of the equation. We can put like a beta 1 depending on what's my gender, plus a beta 2 depending if I have to shower. So if I feel confident to get too close in my staying that day. So you can start building a really complex model that try to explain this simple phenomenon that we do every day. Thank you, Mehdi. Thank you for not kicking. So if I want to build a model with a weird experiment, what I need to do is go in the department, but now I've already biased you, so I need to go to another department, go and tell them, and start doing the same experiment and try to collect the decision about what people do. If they answer back, the first reaction is start smiling because he was starting feeling that I was invading his social space. And so if I start gathering this information with multiple people, what I can do is to build the so famous likelihood function in which I put all the probability here. In this case, I know what's x because I've been measuring, and the things that I want to optimize is the beta parameter that describe the phenomenon. So this is the function to optimize. I can use any optimization tool that I want, and I try to identify alpha and beta that describe the problem. And that's what we do exactly with human behavior in fire. We expose them not to the weird experiment, but something that is in which they're faced to make decision, and we try to understand those parameters and try to predict their behavior. So that's why virtual reality is really powerful, because it gives us the possibility to have a lot of experimental control and put them in situations that we know already that are gonna give us really powerful data to estimate those models. And this is one of the examples that you can have in terms of experiment. You can start deciding, okay, I'm gonna have 2 exits, different combination of people that can be in front of those exits. I can put the visual of the decision maker in different parts. I can put the smoke coming this way, on the other way. And if you start combining, you can have different variables that can affect the behavior with different levels. And if you start calculating the number of scenarios that you're gonna get, it's gonna get crazy because it's more than 1,000 possible scenarios if we were supposed to do all of them. Generally, to avoid this problem, we use orthogonal design. But there is another modeling, another solution that we could use in this kind of descriptions modeling that is even more powerful, and it's called efficient design. And what we do is basically, of course, from a conceptual model, you need to figure it out from the literature what are the variables that we already know are going to affect the problem, the behavior. But then we need to also understand what was the assumption, what has been observed, if those factors were positive, negative on the decision. Or we can even do some pilot study with some prior experiment, maybe develop with an orthogonal design. But the important thing is that if you have information, prior knowledge about what is going to be the factor, it's like the chicken and the eggs, because it's like assuming that you know already the answer of your problem, that is the estimation of a model. But if we start getting from the literature some prior information, we can use Bayesian analysis and try to identify what are the best experiments that are going to reduce the famous p-values of the final model. What does it mean? We need to create a function that is called the error, that is somehow, in the long way, is the determinant of the negative inverse of the Hessian matrix, and what I want to focus is log likelihood. And the log likelihood is the function that we use to do optimization. And it's the bad guy that is telling us if the p-values are good or bad for factors that we are investigating. This ugly definition gets transformed in this ugly formulation, where we have a prior here. When we talk about Bayesian analysis, we have a probability multiplied, a likelihood multiplied by a prior. In this case, you can see determinant that is matching with this. This is the Hessian of the likelihood structure that is in here. And here we were saying that is an inverse of k, where k is the number of factors. The good thing is you don't need to implement this. There are already software that help you to develop this. You need to formulate the structure of your problem in a good way, program it, and then you have a simulator, Monte Carlo simulation that allow you to estimate what are the best scenarios. And that's what happened here. We managed to identify the best 12 scenarios that we knew already were the most interesting from a statistical point of view to show to people to get the best investigation of the impact of those factors that we were investigating. Sounds really odd, sounds really complex. It took me 2 weeks to read again that equation to figure it out why it was working. But if you study a bit of optimization and you know that everything, when we do optimization in a discrete choice model, comes from a likelihood function, you will understand why this, if we minimize this, is going to get really good results later on when we do data collection. Generally, when we estimate, and this is not the toughest part of the research, generally when we estimate traditional model, what we have with the discrete choice model is that we estimate, like in traditional linear model, the parameter and their p-value. And then if we want to understand and use this model and make prediction about how people are going to choose an exit, in this case, I'm going to just give you the information that NP is the number of people close to an exit, the distance of the exit, if there is smoke coming from the exit, and the familiarity of that exit. We can start building the utility function for each exit, and then we can use the famous equation of McFadden and calculate the probability that someone is going to use one exit rather than another exit. So what we did, we collect the information through our VR experiment, and we were capable to estimate those numbers. The limitation of this approach and traditional model is that you associate this parameter to the full sample. And hence, you generally tend to assume that the full population is going to behave using that parameter. And we can relax about a bit this condition with mixed logit model, in which you assume that you don't estimate just a parameter, but you estimate a distribution that try to represent all the possible sensitivity of each people. But still, it was called in one book of transportation the model of the century. Don't think so. It's good, but not flexible enough, and I'm gonna show you why. The why is because we did another study in which we start using more advanced concept, and the best things that you can do, at least from my understanding after the 2 weeks at MIT, is the use of hierarchical Bayesian estimators. I'm gonna try to explain the general concept and then show you a bit of equation so I can look smart and you can get scared. And everyone is gonna be happy. So we can have really two extreme situations when we do analysis of our data. Assuming that this is not just a number, but a vector of information. And we want to estimate a mean. And this is probably the data that we have been collecting here in Christchurch, Auckland, and the data collected in Wellington. About transportation, just because maybe transportation issues. The things that we can do is to create an average that represent the full data. They try to describe the full data using all the data at the same time. And we can kind of say probably this is the mean of New Zealand. Or we can start doing dependent means for each city and say this is pretty much the mean from Auckland, Christchurch, Auckland, and Wellington. And you will see that I can trust much more this for Christchurch because I just used the data from Christchurch. But what if we have a fourth city? This approach is gonna be a bit, not that good. Which one I should choose? Probably I can start saying this is more similar to this city or not. Instead, in this case, I'm kind of spreading all the variance in one single parameter, but still I'm not certain. Hierarchical model work in this way. Work in the way in which you still try to estimate the parameter for each data set, but you also say that those parameters are linked to a general parameter that can be probably the parameter associated to New Zealand. So if we have still a fourth case, we can get information from here. But if we are still in these three cases, we can still borrow information from the specific layer in which you are. And why it's good for me? Because for me, this set of data are people. And if I start assuming that this set of people are people, that means that I'm capable to estimate single parameter of single individuals. So instead of having a model that estimates a general parameter for everyone, I can estimate for each participant that participates in my experiment a specific set of parameters that explain how he was choosing between exit. And that was when it clicked in my mind, it was like, whoa, that's really powerful. And so I started working with Shang, the guy that graduated from MIT, because he was the geek there at MIT in hybrid choice. And so we tried to see with some data set, VR data set, if we could estimate those parameters for individual. Scary equation. So this is the formulation that I was showing you first. And we have a utility function with deterministic part and the error. The deterministic part is a vector, a combination of variable that you can observe, associate, multiply by the parameters. It's just a vectorial formulation, plus the error. J, available option that you can have 2, 3, 4 exit or more, and is the individual that we are observing. Mixed logit, we were saying that we can make the assumption that those parameters associated with, for instance, the number of people in front of exit, I can be more skeptical about following them than maybe. So we can have different variables. So we can try to model them assuming that there is a distribution. For the sake of this paper, we try to use a normal distribution. And if we make this assumption, we can use a likelihood function. It became a bit more advanced likelihood function because you need to make the integration because the parameter is not any longer a fixed parameter, so you need to integrate the probability consider that the parameter here should be n here, but my friend decided to put a half in the paper and change it, but it's a normal distribution. So you need to do the calculation of probability integrated over the normal distribution. But imagine that this is not just a monodimensional problem. You have a normal distribution for all the parameters. And this one start becoming impossible to calculate with a closed formulation. So that's why we use some simulation to do it. But to be honest, this is something that is already implemented in many software, in R, MATLAB. It's quite easy to do. It's not that advanced. The other layer we apply is to stop thinking about using a single value to describe a phenomenon, but we use probability. And that's the core of Bayesian analysis, that you describe any phenomenon with a probability. And you assume that you have some prior information that you can use to have really good fitting with the data that you have, and try to get the best fitting that you can. So basically, the hierarchical model estimation became this monster here, in which, don't get scared, let's try to go through together, and we are gonna be safe. You can see that here, there's a link here, because somehow we are getting, when we are trying to, this is called the posterior distribution. The distribution that we want to observe is the results of our modeling in Bayesian analysis. Basically proportional, because there is a normalized factor that we generally don't consider at this stage when we explain the concept, but then we need to calculate it. And there is basically a likelihood function back here multiplied by prior distribution. The prior distribution is something that we need to assume, and if you go through the paper, you see the rationale that we use for this prior distribution. And we need to find a way to calculate this and try to optimize, find the optimal solution. And you can imagine that this is even worse than this. There is no closed solution that can give you straight away the results. In Bayesian analysis, there are really limited cases in which you can have a closed solution. When the complexity grows, the posterior formulation became really advanced with integral that don't have a closed formulation. And what in the field they've been testing is different way to find a solution and tricks to do it. The trick that we use here is called MCMC, that is the Markov chain Monte Carlo, and this is the way the software works to try to estimate the optimal solution. In this case, for finding the optimal solution, we run from 4,000 iterations, but in reality, you don't get just the final results. You try to get a true value through all the iteration when you see that the solution is stable like this one. If the solution was unstable, we would have seen not a nice caterpillar like that, I don't know why they call it caterpillar, but we would have seen things like this. The fact that we saw something like that means that the solution was stable, and we obtained this kind of caterpillar for all the parameters that we were trying to estimate. And the results of our model was any longer a single number associated with the way people perceive smoke, emergency lighting, but it was a distribution of points for each individual. So what you see here is the box plot of the parameter of 1,500 people that took part in the experiment. So if I want to go and see what the 10th participant has as a parameter, I can go in my Excel file, identify him, and see what parameter can be associated to him. And this is just the generalized results. And the question is here, should be in your head, so what? The so what is that if I have information on individual scale to individual people, I can start using them to see what's the way and the strategy that we're using to make decision. We haven't published yet these results, so it's classified. So the things that we thought later on, what if we start doing some cluster analysis and see all these these parameter clustered together? And we identified there were 4 different clusters that explain how people were choosing exit. This is, for instance, just the variable, the parameter associated to how people perceive others. In a way, we can say that if this parameter is positive, that means that if you see more people close to the exit, you're gonna choose that exit. If the parameter is negative, that means that if you see too many people there, the utility about that exit is gonna drop, and so you're gonna use another way. And what you can see here with our cluster analysis is that we identify a cluster in which there were a lot of, in this cluster, basically people were tending to choose crowded exit. And then there are 3 clusters with negative value that tends to avoid crowded exit. And if you start combining this with the clustering results of also the other variable, you can see that people that tend to follow others were really not affected by the presence of smoke, but they were affected in a different way on the presence of emergency lighting. So we can start identify way in which people behave and start defining profiles. And at the end of the day, why we need to do those profiles? Because we need to simulate those behavior so we can eventually get all these fancy modeling results in a software that can help us to simulate the evacuation from a building like this one and try to get results that are as close as possible to reality. So this is the end. If we still have some time, I can show you some other things that we have done in a virtual reality. Otherwise, I'm gonna get some question. Up to you. I have still some backup slide about training and how to use.
Cool. Yeah. Well, are there any questions from the audience?
Yep.
Thanks very much, Rino, for
No
the
worries.
interesting presentation. So this brings me up with a new idea about driving behavior modeling using VR. Do you think there is a potential in that?
There is a potential if we manage to have headsets that don't have any peripheral impairments. When we drive unconsciously, or consciously, I don't know, unconsciously probably is the best way to say it, we use peripheral view. If I come behind you, let's do another weird experiment. You tell me if I'm doing left or right.
Right.
I could have put a headset on him and do the same experiment in VR, we wouldn't be able to see anything because we don't have yet peripheral view in virtual reality. And when we drive, we use a lot of peripheral view. So all the results that we can get might be strongly biased on this fact. Unless we use a cave or screen that basically surround you and you have the possibility to see in any direction regardless. So that's the limitation that I see in using augmented virtual reality for driving simulators. We have a lot of cool platforms developed even for video games to have all the acceleration. I managed to get a quote from a gaming store. If you spend roughly 25,000, you can have a good setup in which you actually simulate also the acceleration because you're on a platform that is giving you acceleration depending on where and how you're driving in the VR space. But the peripheral view, I think, is the biggest limitation. We have some new prototypes with 180 field of view. I haven't never tried them. Probably they are good, but it's not yet out of the shelf VR. Unless someone knows some prototype that has been released on the market, because it's always like you need to check every day pretty much to see what is new. I hope it helps. Any other question? Yeah.
All right. If I get it right, that some of the results of this you can then use for designing buildings and things like that. That's the purpose.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't use those results.
You've got ranges of behavior, in terms of a cluster analysis. But if I get it right, that those depend on the factors you've taken into account.
Yep.
So how do you decide what to do about possible things which are not taken into account? For example, the Grenfell Towers. It's not a question of people getting out, it's because the fire department had wrongly told people stay there, and so they were listening to what the fire department said, but they should not have done that.
When you do design, you make the assumption that people won't make mistake, at least the one that need to manage.
But
the
they do,
disaster.
what are you going to do?
In that case,
Very
we
well.
can spend one, this is same problem, we can spend $1 billion for a building to make it super safe and make sure, or we need to start being engineer and do the best that we can do with the knowledge that we have. And if there are people that make mistake in society need to be charged and be accountable for that. Otherwise, we will end up designing buildings that are not affordable any longer if we will make them 100% safe from a fire perspective. Because
So
No.
what you're saying is, people will make mistakes, there will be unexpected things happening.
and that's why we
Forget-
have a
forget it.
probabilistic
Don't
as-
take it into account.
and that's why we have a probabilistic approach, because we're
Yeah.
never gonna get the certainty that things are gonna go exactly in that way. But if there is a problem in terms of managing of the disaster, you can do the best design that you want, but if the who is managing the disaster doesn't do the right things, can't do much.
Okay, well, this is where I would have suggested you need to go into a resilience approach, where you assume that you don't know what's gonna happen.
That's another field of research, but it's not the things that you can talk with Susan Wilkinson, my colleague, and she's the expert on that. I focus on providing tools to fire engineers because they need these kind of tools to do the design now. And then there is much more level of complication that we can have, of course.
So is that because they could take a robust approach to designing buildings rather than a stochastic approach, kind of as David is suggesting. But are you saying that fire engineers are using the stochastic approach instead of?
I wish that we were using stochastic approach. From a modeling point of view, we are using, but if you even go to the code, we are still using a deterministic approach that is based on some assumption that are
And those assumptions and then imply best case rather than.
They imply some number take from another code. I can tell you that in New Zealand, based on the code that we are developing UK by someone else. And then the earthquake struck here and everyone forgot about fire safety, and now we are realizing probably we need to change the code because for 10 years has been forgotten. That's what is happening in this country.
It seems to me there's a lot of uncertainty in going about it by having to use the data from thousands of people to try to get some idea of what the effects are. Have you ever thought of trying to combine the virtual reality experience with interviews, where you could sort of have people go through an exercise and then interview them afterwards, saying, at this point you decided to go to the right, why did you go to the right? And they could say, oh, well, I saw smoke coming out of this one. Do you think that's unreliable?
Yeah,
or
it's
are people trying to
something that we
combine-
tried. Even with VR, it's called, we applied verbal protocol analysis with VR, and basically we were asking people to speak loud what they were doing.
Uh-huh.
So in that case, we weren't trying to infer by observing the behavior. They
Yeah.
were telling us, I'm seeing smoke, I'm gonna go away, now I'm gonna, I see that, I'm gonna do this. And so that's something that we did for an earthquake project, and it seems really promising. And it's something, a way to go, I'm always keen to put more information, and also for the future I wish to do also more physiometric study when I do VR, so I can check all the heart rate, because breathing rate, there are all physiometric things that can even help us to understand what's the stress level and try to even understand if the stress level has an impact on all these parameters shift around, because that's another important thing. We tried with EEG, but that's not the way to go yet. EEG is the headset that try to measure electromagnetic things, but if you start moving with the EEG, basically you're tracking the fact that you're moving. You're basically generating noise.
Yeah.
They are not sensitive enough unless you put the sensor on the scalp.
Plus you're generating stress
We
while
can-
you're trying to measure it, I guess.
So we try, and we basically did the disaster from a data collection point of view. I can tell you that we tried, but so the future, and I'm applying for a grant this year again and see if I manage to get funding to do it. I'm applying for the fellowship of the Friends of Erskine. It's called Rutherford, but we will see if I'm gonna get the cash to do that. It's just a matter, to find the resources. This is something that research is becoming for me now just the things that I do in my free time. because when you're a lecturer, it's, in theory, you have 40% of teaching, sure.
So
Yeah.
you highlighted the importance of kind of physiological responses. But the physiological response is quite different if I go into a room and someone puts a VR headset on compared to the fire alarm goes off in my office.
And that's something that we need to do, also validation to prove your point.
Yeah, is there any way of doing that validation?
I can tell you that not related to disaster, it was, there is a Marston project that was funded 2 years ago in Victoria University, and there is a prof called Gina, I always forget her surname, sorry, but if you see that she's measuring emotion using virtual reality, using physiometric things, probably they're gonna come up with answer about how much VR, if VR changed the way we have physiological response. She's involved in this other project as well, because she has been doing things, and they are doing just the simple Planck experiment, in which you put someone in front of an elevator, the elevator open, and then you need to walk on this straight piece of wood, and they are trying to measure emotion using this simple experiment. They also developed their own version of that experiment, but probably they are the right person to get this kind of information. I don't think we will have time to address so much of this.
Cool. Last question from
Yeah, just with this profiling, which, yeah, it's a useful way to group people. It's, I think they use it in like the Facebook, like group people in terms of their like attributes. And I was just wondering if you can use, like, say that one particular profile kind of didn't care about the experiment, or therefore their results would be like not valid, and you could use that as a way to exclude a bunch of results. Say,
Never thought about it.
like that it would be positively correlated with some.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, something, or that'll, yeah, I don't know, if you have indicators to know.
Well, never thought about it. That's something that I should talk with my friend and see if they've done anything like that in transportation to see, because sometimes you find people that try to hack your
Yeah, it's
experiment,
essentially
try to do weird things just for the sake of be annoying. That's
Yeah,
another
but you
kind
could
of
put an
behavior.
indicator, yeah, somehow.
Generally, we kick them in the butt when they're not. Generally, we can identify them when we do VR experiment in the lab. It's really difficult when we do online survey, but probably that's something that we should think about it. And to be honest, we had a similar problem because we were doing another questionnaire and using a Turk on Amazon that basically give you 20 cents, and we found out that there were people building bots to make $3. And like, and we identified that all these answers were rubbish. But we haven't, I never thought about that kind of application. It can be a way, but I need to think about it.
Yeah,
That's really good.
It's not obvious.
Just one comment for, it's a follow-up what Matt said. I've done also a sort of experiment for driving behavior modeling. Actually, that was in Holland. So what we did is we didn't say why we are doing this, right? We just hired people without our intention. So we didn't say, so they couldn't basically know what is the idea behind it. And then we did what Mark proposed. So instead of saying loudly what they're doing, of course it was driving, it was not
Interviewing
video,
them later.
we interviewed them later.
No, there are different ways to do it. And another thing that is coming, and it's gone from my mind, gosh, what I was saying, I completely forgot, sorry. I was thinking something that you were talking, no, it's gone, I didn't catch it.
Cool.
What was it?
Well, you guys can chat about it
Yeah.
afterwards, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much.